Hello, everybody. Testing, can you hear me? Hear me? Hello, everybody. All right. Welcome to another live video by Jerry Barto. Today we're going over a progressive. We're going over this.
A Progressive's Guide to Choosing Between Bernie and Warren. West and David.
But this article was written by, and what he said, and this article was written by
West and David Pagano.
And it was published
Following December 11th, 2019.
And this article is a
31 minutes read. Look at.
All right, so let's get started. And hopefully you'll be able to see it. I'll go over the links last. So, enjoy.
So you're considering supporting one or both of Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren for president. Perhaps you're leaning toward one over the other, but aren't sure. Maybe you've made your choice, but want confirmation. You may even like them both equally. But you can still only vote, or caucus, for one this primary. Bernie and Warren agree on a lot and call each other friends. The story goes he only ran in 2016 after asking her to first, which she declined. Their mutual respect results in an aversion to criticizing each other to the point they even agreed to a non-aggression pact before launching their campaigns. The media regularly lumps Bernie and Warren together, portraying them as sharing, or splitting, the progressive wing opposite the rest of the pack. If differences are highlighted, they're often purely aesthetic ones, leaving the real policy-based distinctions smoothed over or ignored. Contrasting the two at all is even dismissed by some as divisive. But the entire purpose of a primary is to weigh your options before nominating the strongest candidate. As progressives, we should want to make informed decisions, and we should welcome the way healthy debate pushes politicians to be better on the issues. Anything less is simply undemocratic and a boon to Donald Trump facing an undervetted challenger. Because of this reticence to properly analyze Bernie and Warren side by side, while out registering voters, I often meet people who have been convinced they are the same and are unsure which to choose. Not only are they not the same, they're far from even being the most similar pair in the race. This is a progressive's guide to the differences between Bernie and Warren. Table of contents. Democratic origins, wealth and class, campaign finance, healthcare, education, foreign policy, criminal justice. The media regularly lumps Bernie and Warren together, portraying them as sharing, or splitting, the progressive wing opposite the rest of the pack. If differences are highlighted, they're often purely aesthetic ones, leaving the real policy-based distinctions smoothed over or ignored. Contrasting the two at all is even dismissed by some as divisive. But the entire purpose of a primary is to weigh your options before nominating the strongest candidate. As progressives, we should want to make informed decisions, and we should welcome the way healthy debate pushes politicians to be better on the issues. Anything less is simply undemocratic and a boon to Donald Trump facing an undervetted challenger. Because of this reticence to properly analyze Bernie and Warren side by side, while out registering voters, I often meet people who have been convinced they are the same and are unsure which to choose. Not only are they not the same, they're far from even being the most similar pair in the race. This is a progressive's guide to the differences between Bernie and Warren. Table of contents. Democratic origins, wealth and class, campaign finance, healthcare, education, foreign policy, criminal justice, climate crisis, immigration, social issues, labor, other / miscellaneous, beating Trump and beyond. Democratic origins. Both Bernie and Warren have come to compete for the Democratic nomination while holding leadership positions within the party, chairman of outreach and vice chair of conference, respectively, but their separate paths leading up to this confluence have been radically different. Bernie celebrates winning election to the U.S. House of Representatives as Vermont's at-large member in 1990, H. Rob Swanson/AP. Often denigrated by a vocal minority of party hardliners as not a real Democrat, Bernie is the longest-serving independent in congressional history, though he has caucused with the Democrats and voted with the party over 90% of the time throughout these 3 decades. A civil rights activist turned mayor, Bernie began his political career further left as a member of Vermont's local Democratic Socialist Party. He participated in his first formal Democratic Party function in 1988, at which he was physically assaulted by a member of the party for endorsing Jesse Jackson for president. Bernie unseated a Republican to begin his congressional career in 1991, and in his first year co-founded the Congressional Progressive Caucus that currently contains 98 Democratic members, of which Warren is not one. He now runs his Senate campaigns with backing from the party so that he does not oppose a separate Democratic candidate. Warren, while a professor at University of Pennsylvania in 1990, leaves Cougars/Corbis. As for Warren, despite growing up with New Deal Democrat parents in a then blue state, she has been a Republican for the majority of her life, including 12 years of Reagan and Bush presidencies. While working as a corporate attorney and bankruptcy law specialist, she switched her party registration at some point in her late 40s, before becoming a dedicated Democrat in 2005 and flipping a red Senate seat blue 8 years later. Though Warren is now closer to the left than most Democrats, she still largely refuses to discuss her past and has seemed uncomfortable and unprepared when doing so. Wealth and class. Wealth inequality in the U.S. is currently the worst it's been since the years leading up to the Great Depression, and millennials are the first and only generation to be poorer than their parents in modern history. Though this topic is perhaps the one on which Bernie and Warren are most commonly associated, they actually have drastically different ideologies. The rich are not the enemy. In fact, most of us would like to be rich, Warren has opined, and the poor are not the only ones who have problems, so don't talk as if they are the only ones who deserve compassion. Bernie takes a more hardline approach, stating simply, billionaires should not exist. Warren gives Trump a standing ovation during his 2018 State of the Union address while Bernie remains seated and does not applaud. Alex Wong. In contrast, Warren has no beef with billionaires, and believes they earned their riches because they work hard. While she seems to view the ultra-wealthy class as a meritocratic aspiration that just needs a little regulation, Bernie sees it as an exploitative force keeping the rest of us down. Warren's focus is not about class warfare, whereas Bernie wants the working class to win it. Bernie is a self-avowed democratic socialist, whereas Warren is a capitalist to her bones, who gave Trump a standing ovation this year for swearing, "America will never be a socialist country." Contrary to conventional wisdom, Democrats now view socialism more favorably than capitalism. As for what they actually plan to do, Bernie and Warren have agreed less than you may think. Warren has declined to co-sponsor any of Bernie's 3 bills to expand the estate tax, and has even voted with Republicans to repeal it, though this year she introduced a housing bill she proposes be funded by it. She also declined to co-sponsor any of his 3 bills to enact a Wall Street transaction tax or his bill to break up the big banks, though she's since joined him in supporting the latter. They do agree on a wealth tax, however Bernie first pitched the idea as early as 1974. Before formally introducing a plan in 2017, and Warren followed suit after kicking off her campaign this year. Warren's version kicks in $14 million later than Bernie's and maxes out at 3%, whereas Bernie's gets progressively higher until reaching 8% for wealth above $10 billion. Over 10 years, Warren's raises an estimated $2.75t, whereas Bernie's would net almost double that, estimated at $4.35t in the same time. With, "How are you going to pay that for that?" still the main counter to any talk of expanding our social programs, this is a key number for the progressive agenda. Zuckman and Say's 2019. What does this mean for the ultra-wealthy? The top 0.1% of Americans have about as much wealth as the bottom 90% of us, and under Bernie's plan those richest 15 individuals' fortunes would get about 80% smaller. Warren's proposal takes them down 54%. In regards to personal wealth, Bernie has consistently been one of the poorest members of Congress with a current net worth close to $2 million, while Warren is nearer the top with a $12 million fortune. To much media attention, Bernie recently became a millionaire following his post-2016 book sales. Warren, on the other hand, amassed her wealth by flipping foreclosed homes, loaning money at high interest rates, and working as a corporate lawyer on cases that included helping Big Steel escape providing health care for minors, an insurance company avoid compensating asbestos victims, and Dow Chemical dodge payout for women sick from toxic breast implants. Campaign finance. Closely tied to their views on wealth are the differences in how the two finance their campaigns. At least 35 billionaires have donated to Warren across her 2018 Senate and current presidential campaigns, while another is using a dark money group to run ads for her. Bernie has accepted zero money from billionaires in this same time period. When the spouse of one billionaire tried to donate to Bernie's campaign, he returned the check out of principle. Source: Federal Election Commission/chart, Jonathan Lai. Despite this, Bernie is the only 2020 campaign who has received more money from individual donors than Trump, and he has about 3x more total cash than Warren. This is in large part because Bernie has earned more small-dollar donations than anyone in either party by a considerable margin. Reflective of this, Bernie's average donation is $18, whereas Warren's is $26.12. This was edited to clarify that Bernie has received more money from individual donors than Trump, not more money total. Bernie is also the only Democrat with more individual contributors, over 1M, and more total contributions, over 4M, than Trump. In fact, he has more individual donations from more people than any candidate in U.S. history, reaching the 1M unique donor landmark about half a year sooner than Obama's previous record. A few weeks later, Warren's campaign announced her donor total is only about half as many as Bernie's, placing her third in small-dollar donations and fourth in total money contributed. Bernie leads the pack with 27.2% of all donations made to a primary candidate, while Warren is in third with less than half that at 12.4%. Bernie has received more money from women than any other candidate, while Warren is second, and more money from men than any other Democrat, while Warren is fifth. ActBlue donor data. The gulf between the two candidates is in large part because Bernie receives far more donations from the working class, Trump's key demographic, than Warren, whose numbers are more in line with Pete Buttigieg's. This is further illustrated by Bernie outraising Trump in 5 states, including battleground state Wisconsin, while Warren only outraises Trump in her home state of Massachusetts. Bernie leads amongst the 206 counties that flipped from Obama to Trump as well, earning over 3x the donations in them as Warren. Warren, whose campaign treasurer is a major bungler, refuses to release the bunglers she's used in the past, and has appeared to break her own pledge to forego big money fundraising when a megadonor bought her access to the DNC voter database. Bernie has never used bundling, a practice that allows fundraising from secret donors that are never disclosed, nor has he had voter files provided to him by the rich. Bernie has also consistently rejected corporate PACs and big money fundraisers his entire career. Warren joined him in adopting the same stance for the first time this primary, but only after transferring over $10.5 million in funds collected from such sources during her 2018 Senate run to her current campaign. This money came from donors including the aforementioned billionaires, as well as the CEO of Royalty Pharma and executives from corporations including Global Petroleum and Mitt Romney's investment firm, Bain Capital. In fact, during her 2018 campaign she took more money from individuals employed in the securities and investments industry than even Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham, bringing in over 28x more than Bernie. Though Warren initially planned to return to openly courting wealthy megadonors if nominated, she has since walked this back under pressure. But in this primary alone, Warren has still accepted money from executives of at least 10 investment banks, including BlackRock, the world's largest investor in deforestation, Raytheon, one of the military-industrial complex's biggest players, and Walmart's Walton Enterprises. Bernie still refuses this type of cash, though he does lead in donations from Walmart employees. Both candidates have plans to ban lobbying from former government officials, but only Warren hires lobbyists to work on her campaign. She wants to tax corporate lobbying, while Bernie vows to ban it and replace this dirty money with public funding to completely free the party from corporate influence. Warren's gentler reforms are preferred by Neeratanden's centrist think tank Center for American Progress, CAP, which is funded by banks, insurance companies, arms manufacturers, and Saudi ally the United Arab Emirates. Healthcare. At least 87% Americans do not have the insurance coverage they need, and 79% Americans are currently struggling with medical debt, with 2/3 of all American bankruptcies 530K annually resulting from medical bills. 45K people die preventable deaths each year due to our current system. Polls asking Democrats to rank the strongest and/or most trustworthy candidates on healthcare consistently show Bernie in first and Warren in third behind Joe Biden. Though they are portrayed as especially similar on this issue, they're actually some distance apart, with a key difference being Bernie is proposing to abolish all existing medical debt, whereas Warren is not. Bernie plans to cover all prescription drug costs after $200 per person per year, whereas Warren's proposed cap is much higher, $6,000 for families and $3,000 for individuals. Nearly 1/4 Americans can't afford the medicine they are prescribed, and with Big Pharma predatorily inflating the costs of many crucial drugs like insulin, this is literally an issue of life and death for many. Warren has been an ardent ally for the medical device industry, co-sponsoring legislation to repeal the tax they pay to help fund the Affordable Care Act, ACA, and writing another bill that would let them off the hook for misappropriating research funds. Bernie supported neither of these. Warren, whose daughter is the CEO of a health insurance, pharmaceutical, and medical device consulting firm that works to raise costs for patients, has taken money from these industries' lobbyists. Bernie has not. As for single-payer universal healthcare, Bernie's 2016 campaign is largely responsible for taking Medicare for all from an extreme fringe idea to a litmus test issue so popular it now has majority support even amongst Republicans. Crucially, Medicare for all still polls with majority support even when it is explicitly stated that it replaces private insurance. Bernie has consistently fought for true Medicare for all, which abolishes premiums, deductibles, co-pays, and private insurance, as a main tenet of his career since at least 1971. He promises to reintroduce such legislation in his first week in office if elected, and has won the endorsement of the country's largest nurses' union. Warren's positions have been far less clear. She actually ran against Medicare for all in 2012 and refused to endorse Bernie's plan in the 2016 election, before eventually signing on to his bill in 2017. Still, one of her closest advisors revealed she didn't actually like the idea, implying she would eventually abandon it, and the SVP of finance industry-funded think tank Third Way admitted, she's not committed to single-payer health insurance. That's good enough for us. After waffling on the issue for some time, Warren has indeed backtracked, refocusing merely on access and choice, aligning herself with centrists like Buttigieg over Bernie. Despite a majority of her own supporters preferring Medicare for all, her newest proposal is just a public option that does not abolish premiums or private insurance, has no built-in phasing to Medicare for all, and requires the majority of adults to buy into the current Medicare system to receive its coverage. After Warren released this plan, she dropped dramatically in the polls, but health insurance stocks went up. When Bernie released his plan, they went down. Warren claims that if elected she will introduce a second bill in year 3 for something that she calls Medicare for all, but unlike Bernie's bill it does not appear to include mental health care, preserves private insurance, and requires buying into the system to receive coverage. By year 3 she would be shifting focus to re-election, and any potential Democratic majority won in Congress is likely to have already been lost in 2022's midterms. Warren explicitly deprioritizes this eventual Medicare for all bill as long-term 7 times, and should it not be passed during the one remaining year of her first term, a Republican president could kill it the following year. The bulk of paying for both candidates' plans comes from combining current spending with taxes on the rich, administrative savings due to increased efficiency, and ending the hundreds of billions in government subsidies currently paid to private insurers. But Bernie and Warren differ drastically on how they would raise the rest of the funds required. Bernie's plan is often attacked as a middle-class tax hike, whereas Warren claims her plan avoids one, but this is a misleading characterization. Both proposals are employer-side taxes, with exemptions for small businesses, which are just indirect middle-class taxes, as they are passed on to employees via paycheck deductions. Matt Bruenig/People's Policy Project. Bernie offers multiple solutions, the main one being a 7.5% payroll tax on employers. His tax is over $9,000 less per employee than the average current private insurance premium contribution, meaning most workers will actually see less money taken out of their paychecks while high earners would pay more. Warren proposes taxing employers roughly $9,500 per employee, regardless of their income. Unlike Bernie's plan, this regressive tax would disproportionately burden the working class, forcing lower-paid employees to pay a much higher percentage of their wages than higher earners. As well as discouraging job creation, Warren's version even leaves a loophole that allows employers to evade payment by outsourcing and replacing full-time workers with contractors. Experts warn this would cause the tax to increase and lead to even more tax evasion in an unworkable death spiral. Separately, Warren's plan even requires an unrelated immigration bill that transfers funds to pass first, adding yet another opportunity for her increasingly complex process to be derailed. Education. 45M Americans are struggling under a combined total of $1.6 trillion in student debt, which is greater than the GDP of most countries. The average student owes over $30,000, 40% of students could default on their loans by 2023, and 20 states can suspend your professional or driver's licenses if you fall behind on payments. Both Bernie and Warren want to make public college tuition free moving forward, but only Bernie, who is the only candidate polling higher than Trump with college students, plans to abolish 100% of existing student debt for all people. Warren is polling third with students, and her complex $640 million plan appears to relieve only about 40%. She only covers up to $50,000 for those with a household income of less than $100,000, $1 less in debt relief for every $3 in earnings made above that threshold up to $250,000, and then nothing above that. The majority of Americans support abolishing all student debt. Bernie's proposal is estimated to create 1M more jobs than Warren's, and because student debt disproportionately burdens women and people of color, studies show eradicating all of it would reduce disparities such as the racial wealth gap between black and white households from 12:1 to 5:1. Warren claims eliminating all debt would actually widen the racial wealth gap, despite all evidence to the contrary, and her plan to forgive less debt is estimated to leave more of this disparity intact. The means testing she proposes also creates other issues that truly universal programs, such as Bernie's, avoid. As for K-12, more teachers have donated to Bernie than any other candidate, with Warren at number 2. So far only one teachers' union has endorsed a candidate. UTLA, the second largest in the nation with 35,000 members, chose Bernie with 80% of the vote. This is in large part because of Bernie's dedicated history of backing teachers' unions to the point of marching with them, whereas Warren is more hesitant to support them and usually limits herself to speeches when she does. Our public school teachers have seen their salaries decrease over the last decade despite the average college graduate's salary increasing in the same time. Bernie is the only candidate proposing a minimum salary for teachers $60,000 while Warren calls for unspecified raises. Though Bernie unequivocally backs the NAACP's call for a moratorium on all new charter schools, Warren has waffled on the issue, lauding them at some times and offering vague limitations at others. The Network for Public Education grades Bernie an A and Warren a C for their affiliations, in large part due to the latter hiring an education advisor with a pro-corporate, union-busting resume and a chief of staff with ties to public school privatization. Warren, who's received praise from pro-privatization lobbyists, has supported an all-voucher system that appears similar to Betsy DeVos's position. Her campaign has since claimed she's only ever pushed for public school vouchers, which would still force public schools to compete for funding. She has also promoted No Child Left Behind style test-based accountability measures. Bernie supports none of these tactics. Though Bernie briefly taught low-income preschoolers and lectured at Harvard and elsewhere, Warren has far more experience as an educator. She spent the bulk of her career as a professor at multiple elite institutions including Harvard, preceded by 1 year as a public school teacher on an emergency certificate. Curiously, Warren now claims she was essentially fired from that job for being pregnant, though county records and her own accounts up until that point contradict this. Warren also recently came under fire when, confronted by a concerned parent, she denied sending her kids to private school, even though her son attended one with a current annual tuition of nearly $20,000 from grades 5 to 12. 12/11. This piece originally stated in error that Bernie had no teaching experience and has been corrected. Foreign policy. With both primarily known for and likened to each other on the basis of their domestic policy, foreign policy is perhaps where Bernie and Warren differ the most. Warren supports expanding the military and has voted to hand Trump a larger military budget 2 times, increasing his spending power by $80 billion to $700 billion total, more than Trump himself even asked for. Bernie is the only candidate to have voted against every single increase, and he vows to cut military spending. The U.S. currently spends more on the military than all other discretionary spending combined, for a total outlay greater than the next 7 nations combined. Data from U.S. Office of Management and Budget Archives. A VP from defense contractor Raytheon donated to Warren 3 times this year, with a spokesperson for the company saying they have a positive relationship with her, and we interact with her and her staff regularly. Warren has also accepted money from the founder of a lobbying firm whose clientele includes convicted war criminals. No executives from the military-industrial complex or war criminal lobbyists have donated to Bernie. On the other hand, it appears actual military members have a different preference for their commander-in-chief. Bernie leads all candidates in money donated from the enlisted, with more than Trump, Biden, and Buttigieg combined, while Warren has less than 1/4 as much and is 4th behind Trump. Regarding South America, Warren has legitimized Bolivia's violent fascist insurrection that's backed by Trump, while Bernie called out the coup. To the glee of right-wing media, Warren also supports Trump's illegal sanctions on Venezuela that have caused an estimated 40,000 civilian deaths, and has recognized the Trump-backed right-wing opposition leader attempting a coup there as well. Bernie opposes this intervention too. Though neither supports leftist measures like boycotting and divesting in Israel, BDS, Bernie, a Jewish man who lost family in the Holocaust, is more willing to criticize Israel and defend Palestinian rights than Warren. Unlike her, he has committed to pressuring Israel to follow international law by conditioning the $3.8 billion worth of money and weapons the U.S. currently sends the nation annually and wants to repurpose some of it as humanitarian aid for Gaza. Warren has taken over 7x more money from the pro-Israel lobby than Bernie since the 2018 cycle, receiving more on average each year than Mike Pence. Warren, who characterizes the apartheid state that does not allow 5M Palestinian residents to vote as a liberal democracy, joined McConnell and Graham in signing 2 AIPAC-sponsored letters, one in 2014 opposing the Palestinian Unity Deal, and one to Barack Obama in 2016 that asked him to veto any UN resolution that condemned Israel's illegal settlements. Bernie signed neither. Warren further distances herself from Bernie by warning of Palestinian births bearing down on Israel, joining the Trump administration in opposing Palestine joining the UN, defending Israel's bombing of Palestinian schools and hospitals, and even justifying Israeli drones murdering thousands of Palestinian civilians, including children playing on the beach. Unlike Bernie, Warren has refused to rule out war with Iran, pushing the unsubstantiated right-wing claim that they have nuclear weapons. She voted to let Trump impose sanctions that kill children, violated the nuclear deal, and led to rising tension. Bernie was one of only 2 in Congress to vote against this. Bernie and Warren have conflicting views on and relationships with several big players in U.S. foreign policy as well. In response to Trump's charges against Julian Assange for exposing U.S. war crimes, Warren called Assange a bad actor who should be held accountable, while Bernie instead pledged to end prosecution of whistleblowers. Hawkish former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, who defended killing 500,000 Iraqi children with U.S. sanctions, has advised and funded Warren. Albright vocally opposes Bernie to the point that, in 2016, she even claimed, "There's a special place in hell for women who support him." Warren voted to confirm Trump's former UN ambassador, Nikki Haley, as well as Obama's CIA Director John Brennan, who led the drone program that continues to massacre civilians while repeatedly lying about its actions. Bernie voted against both. Criminal justice. With over 2 people currently imprisoned, the U.S. has both the highest number of individuals behind bars and the highest rate of incarceration in the world by quite a distance. Though less than 1/3 of the U.S. population is Black or Hispanic, these minorities make up over half of the prison population. Across the board, Bernie takes more radical stances on criminal justice than Warren. Perhaps the most notable is his call for a prisoner Bill of Rights that restores voting rights to the over 6M citizens whose convictions currently disqualify them, while Warren supports their continued disenfranchisement. The abolishment of such bans, which were enacted specifically to keep Black Americans from voting, is supported by about 2/3 of the country. Warren does not join Bernie, who was one of the few to vote against their cancellation in 1994, in proposing the restoration of Pell Grants for prisoners, which have been proven to massively reduce recidivism. She also does not join him in specifically calling for free educational and vocational training, ending prison gerrymandering, living wages and safe working conditions, or the creation of a unique federal office to handle prisoner civil rights. People with mental illness are 16x more likely to be killed by law enforcement, and the victims are disproportionately black. Bernie is siding with anti-police violence advocates in calling for an alternate response system made up of unarmed professionals you can call to help people in crisis and handle mental health emergencies. Warren's co-responder system would continue sending armed law enforcement to such situations. Though she did not co-sponsor his 2015 bill to ban private prisons, Warren joined Bernie on this issue this year. He also supports a total ban on police use of facial recognition technology, which have been shown to be racist, though Warren merely calls for vague privacy protections. Cannabis reform has support from over 2/3 of Americans, and though Warren has since supported legalization, she did not co-sponsor Bernie's bill to legalize it in 2015, often backtracks to just decriminalization, and her campaign appears to have rescinded a staff job offer over a marijuana conviction. Bernie goes further in several areas, including his promise for complete legalization and expungement to be delivered by executive order in his first 100 days. Though her criminal justice plan is still comprehensive, Warren has at times seemed surprisingly uncomfortable and unprepared when asked about the topic, often changing the subject instead of answering questions. Bernie has also received criticism for voting for Bill Clinton's disastrous 1994 crime bill, though he was actually one of its most vocal critics. It had overwhelming support in Congress, and he eventually signed on only in support of the Violence Against Women Act and assault weapons ban that were included while explicitly opposing the rest. Climate crisis. Experts agree it may already be too late to avoid a catastrophic tipping point in the climate crisis, meaning we need radical action now even to just reduce the damage. Just another half-degree increase in global temperatures would destroy the ecosystems 500 million people rely on for survival, with 800 million people already more vulnerable to heightened natural disasters right now. The Greenland ice sheet, which is losing up to 12.5 tons of ice a day, could be doomed in 10 years, and over 300,000 U.S. homes, worth a combined $117.5 billion, will essentially be underwater within 30 years. Our country contributes to this as the biggest carbon emitter in history. NASA. Bernie and Warren are putting forth drastically different levels of response to the greatest existential threat we've faced in human history. Bernie, who has called for climate action for decades, is championing the Green New Deal, which Warren has previously endorsed, as his flagship environmental policy, and dedicates $16.3 to combat the climate crisis over 15 years, which is more than any other candidate. Warren has chosen to not put forth one main climate-specific plan and split up her environmental policies within other proposals, committing less than 1/5 as much money, with her $3 over 10 years coming far closer to the tepid outlays of centrists like Buttigieg, $2, and Biden, $1.7. Bernie's robust action is also estimated to create 20 million unionized green jobs in the process, and while Warren's campaign doesn't provide any specific estimates, it seems her smaller proposal would create far fewer. Greenpeace and Sunrise Movement both rank Bernie as their #1 candidate to combat the climate crisis with A and A ratings, respectively. Warren comes second in both, with A and B grades, respectively. Several polls show Democratic voters also rank Bernie first on this issue, but Warren slips to #3 behind Biden by this metric. Bernie calls for fossil fuel giants like Exxon that knew the risks as early as the 80s to be prosecuted criminally and civilly and be made to pay damages for causing the climate crisis, while Warren proposes prosecution only if they lied to regulatory agencies. Bernie even calls for public ownership of utilities to remove the private profit motive that leads to wanton pollution while underserving low-income communities. Warren opposes such nationalization, claiming this crisis can be solved by tackling only outright corruption. Unlike Bernie, she has taken money from executives of corporations including Global Petroleum and BlackRock, the world's largest investor in deforestation. When the indigenous people of Standing Rock protested the construction of the treaty-violating Dakota Access Pipeline despite facing militarized police brutality, Bernie actively supported them. Despite still claiming to be of indigenous descent at this point, Warren remained silent until after the Army Corporate of Engineers had already denied the approval needed to begin construction. The pipeline was built in 2017 and has already leaked at least 600,000 gallons of oil. When the Keystone XL pipeline failed a vote and an indigenous activist responded by honoring Congress with a traditional song, Warren had him thrown out and jailed. Carbon pollution comparisons, The New York Times. Bernie has fought to ban fracking since at least 2014, a position Warren did not share until shifting under activist pressure 2 months ago. Unlike Warren, Bernie is the only candidate who rejects geoengineering, carbon markets, carbon offsets, and industrial carbon capture and storage, which the Climate Justice Alliance refers to as destructive schemes and false solutions. Unlike Bernie, Warren has worked to get corporations off the hook for paying to clean up their pollution. The U.S. military alone is the biggest polluter in the world, polluting more than 140 entire nations combined, and Bernie and Warren view this relationship between our foreign policy and the climate crisis from opposite directions. Bernie targets such hypermilitarization as a direct threat to the planet's health, and plans to unite the international community in reducing this harm while repurposing bloated military funds for environmental rehabilitation. To much criticism, Bernie even called climate change, not a foreign power, the biggest threat to national security in 2015. Warren, on the other hand, sees climate change more as an inconvenient obstacle to U.S. militarism, and seems unwilling to address environmental concerns if it means even minor reductions in our aggression abroad. Immigration. There are over 10 million estimated unauthorized immigrants in the U.S. today, many of whom are subjected to numerous human rights abuses and/or deported every day. Both candidates are generally pro-immigrant, though Bernie goes much further in several areas. Note: fiscal years begin October 1st of the previous calendar year. Data: Department of Homeland Security/chart, Chris Knipe/Axios. Bernie is the only candidate who promises to abolish ICE and CBP and fully demilitarize the border. There are over 10 million estimated unauthorized immigrants in the U.S. today, many of whom are subjected to numerous human rights abuse and/or deported every day. Both candidates are generally pro-immigrant, though Bernie goes much further in several areas. Note: fiscal years begin October 1st of the previous calendar year. Data: Department of Homeland Security/chart, Chris Knipe/Axios. Bernie is the only candidate who promises to abolish ICE and CBP and fully demilitarize the border, while Warren says she will keep but refocus these agencies. Bernie opposed the separation of migrant children and families during the Obama administration, but Warren did not take a stand on the issue until after Trump took office. Bernie became the only candidate to call for a moratorium on all deportations in September, though 2 months later Warren added she's open to the idea now as well. Both Bernie and Warren promised to go after employers found exploiting immigrant workers, but only Bernie specifically vows to withhold federal contracts for such exploitative employers, end workplace raids, and implement protections for farm workers. Both support a path to legal status for undocumented immigrants, but while he sets a 5-year time frame to achieve this, she has none. Warren calls to increase the maximum number of refugees allowed into the country to 125,000 with a goal of eventually expanding to 175,000, while Bernie is proposing no limit at all. Furthermore, though Warren has taken similar positions, only Bernie's plan explicitly protects sanctuary cities and stops construction of Trump's wall. Both Warren and Bernie promise to reverse Trump's Muslim ban, but only he goes as far as proposing legislation to restrict any administration's ability to discriminate in such a way in the future. Social issues. Though both candidates support pro-choice measures, Warren voted 2 separate times to ban federal funding for abortions just last year. Out of every candidate, only Bernie voted against this measure every time. The bill passed, helping set the stage for nearly 1,000 women's health clinics losing funding this year alone. Bernie received criticism after endorsing Omaha, Nebraska mayoral candidate and Democrat Heath Mello against a Republican incumbent in 2017 due to Mello acting to restrict abortions prior to 2012, even though Mello has voted with Planned Parenthood 100% of the time since, and reproductive rights groups now see him as an important ally. Though it's received less coverage, Warren still defends and fundraises for Senator Joe Manchin, who continues to oppose reproductive rights to this day. Unlike Bernie, Warren is a current contributor to and previous honored guest of the Federalist Society, which she has called a radical, right-wing group deeply committed to overturning Roe v. Wade. Bernie and Warren are both pro-LGBTQ+. Bernie first came out in support of the community in 1972, before officially recognizing gay pride in Burlington despite fierce opposition in 1983, passing one of the nation's first anti-discrimination laws in 1984, and voting against DOMA in 1996. Warren first publicly announced her support for the community during her 2012 Senate campaign when asked this year if she opposed LGBTQ and rights during her Republican years prior to that. She claimed, "I actually don't remember." Warren recently admitted she was wrong to oppose full healthcare rights for transgender inmates in 2012, a stance Bernie has never held. While Bernie has never misappropriated a minority racial identity, Warren has notably come under fire for controversially claiming to be indigenous despite there being no concrete evidence to support this. She identified herself as Native American on multiple professional and government documents for at least 10 years, even when not fulfilling the requirements to do so, and accepted the accolade of first woman of color in Harvard Law faculty. Warren says her aunt told her of their Native heritage, yet selected white and not American Indian when noting her aunt's race on government forms. To support this unsubstantiated identity, Warren has cited family photos that she refuses to show, claimed her parents had to elope to escape anti-indigenous racism even though their wedding was reported in the local paper, and even plagiarized a supposedly indigenous recipe which she passed off as family tradition. Despite her alleged native pride, Warren has not been a particularly strong ally for the community, even going so far as to discredit indigenous activists as pawns of right-wing extremists, or ignore them entirely, as discussed in the Climate Crisis section of this piece. Many have further criticized Warren's handling of Trump's attacks on the matter, raising questions of how she would handle his antics in a general election. Labor. Bernie and Warren's differences on labor are largely ideological, though the former's bottom-up socialist revolution approach and the latter's top-down capitalist reform approach do find a lot of common ground in the middle. But while Bernie and Warren both support workers taking seats on corporate boards 45% and 40% respectively, only Bernie goes further as the first to call for worker ownership in their companies, an idea polling with majority support. While Warren's labor plans preserve at-will employment, which gives employers the ability to fire employees for nearly any reason, Bernie calls for just cause legislation that prohibits the firing of employees for any reason other than job performance. Warren has co-sponsored legislation to temporarily explore a jobs guarantee program in 15 high unemployment communities, whereas Bernie proposes a more radical, FDR-style nationwide guarantee to unionized employment. In another divergence with Bernie, Warren joins Biden as one. But while Bernie and Warren both support workers taking seats on corporate boards 45% and 40% respectively, only Bernie goes further as the first to call for worker ownership in their companies, an idea polling with majority support. While Warren's labor plans preserve at-will employment, which gives employers the ability to fire employees for nearly any reason, Bernie calls for just cause legislation that prohibits the firing of employees for any reason other than job performance. Warren has co-sponsored legislation to temporarily explore a jobs guarantee program in 15 high unemployment communities, whereas Bernie proposes a more radical, FDR-style nationwide guarantee to unionized employment. In another divergence with Bernie, Warren joins Biden as one of only 2 candidates who hire unpaid interns to work on their campaigns. Other/miscellaneous. Bernie introduced legislation to mandate labeling of GMOs, but Warren joined Republicans in voting it down. Unlike Bernie, Warren initially voted to confirm Trump's appointment of Ben Carson as HUD secretary. Bernie supports nationwide rent control, which Warren opposes. He calls for 7.4 m new units of affordable housing, while she proposes less than half that, 3.2 m. This, combined with her plan to reduce rental costs by just 10% over 10 years, which is less than the rate of inflation, will still leave a shortfall in affordable housing. Warren has an $85 billion plan to expand internet access to rural communities, while Bernie's $150 billion plan also guarantees free internet to public housing and forbids internet service providers from also providing content. Unlike Bernie, Warren wants to hire a cabinet consisting of defense contractors and foreclosure moguls. Beating Trump and beyond. Of course, besides positions and plans, electability, whatever that means, is still a very real consideration when picking a primary candidate. So, how do Bernie and Warren stack up? After 4 victorious runs for mayor of Burlington, Bernie flipped the state's only U.S. House seat in 1990, which had been solid red for a staggering 55 of its 57 years in existence. Then in 2006, he flipped a plus 40-point Republican Senate seat that had never been won by a non-Republican in the 152 years since the party's formation, and ended the longest single-party winning streak in U.S. history with a plus 33-point victory. Compared to his 15 victories, Elizabeth Warren has only won 2 elections in her entire career, both for a Senate seat that has been Democrat-held for the vast majority of the last 100 years. As for this election, there are several ways to analyze it, including volunteer numbers and rally turnout. Bernie has more volunteers, with over 1M, and he also boasts the largest rally of the primary, attracting an estimated 26,000 supporters inside and thousands more outside a park in Queens, New York. The campaign contribution and contributor data discussed in the campaign finance section of this piece also offers crucial insight into what kind of support these two have. Such metrics are arguably stronger indicators of support than polling, as the sample size is the entire country and the question is open-ended: which candidate do you like enough to give your time and hard-earned money to? These proactive signals of intent clearly suggest a more passionate level of support than just answering a multiple-choice question over the phone can. Morning Consult. As for polling, there are several different angles of analysis within this tool as well. Favorability, for example, is a far more consequential stat than many would think. Since at least 1980, the general election candidate with the highest net favorability has won every time, regardless of party or ideology. Bernie has both the highest favorability and net favorability in the primary pack, with 11 more percentage points for favorable than Warren, and a narrowly lower unfavorable rating, 2. In fact, Bernie is the #1 most popular senator in America, while Warren, who is the 7th most unfavorable in the nation, ranks 29th, behind rival candidate Amy Klobuchar. Chart at Ira Hawks. As for nationwide primary poll averages, Bernie has a slight edge over Warren, despite consistently getting less media coverage. Voters who prefer Bernie generally seem to be the most confident in their choice, with the most recent poll showing only 51% of them might change their mind to Warren's 68%. Should supporters defect, Bernie and Warren are both listed as the top second choice amongst each other's base. Warren does far better than Bernie with Buttigieg fans, and Bernie does far better with Biden's, which is about 3x larger of a group. Despite the false narrative to the contrary, Bernie's support is less likely to vote Trump than any other major candidate's. Warren's base is over 2x more likely to vote Trump if she's not the nominee. Bernie is far and away more popular with the youth vote than any other candidate, including Warren, with the most recent poll showing him at majority support amongst those under 35 with 53%, over 3x more than Warren's 17%. In at least the previous 3 general elections, the Democratic nominee only won if they first got the most youth vote in the primary, losing if they did not. Bernie's coalition is also more diverse. He generally earns more non-white support than Warren despite a few exceptions. He consistently polls higher with working-class voters than she does as well, a crucial component in battling Trump's populism. This seems at least in part because of Bernie's bottom-up approach of movement building to create change, not me, us, which is opposite of Warren's top-down meritocratic style. I have a plan for that. Though primary polls usually only include those at least leaning Democrat, more than just Democrats are needed to win a general election. Independents outnumber members of both major parties, and though some suggest more extreme policies may alienate this group, Bernie's plus 34 net approval amongst independents is far higher than Warren's minus 7. Despite her Republican past, Warren seems far less willing to reach out to conservative voters, refusing to hold a town hall on Fox News. Bernie has no such qualms, and has regularly taken opportunities to speak to Republican voters. Bernie's net approval is 28 points higher than Warren's when all voters are included. Reflective of this, Bernie, who has been consistently beating Trump in polls since 2015, has won all but 2 national polls since March, with an average of plus 8.4. Warren has beaten Trump in all but 11, averaging plus 7.2. Data, Real Clear Politics/Table, Weston Pagano. Of course, elections aren't won by national voting, they're won by winning states, and 6 states flipped from Obama to Trump in 2016. Using Real Clear Politics poll aggregation, we can see that Bernie is polling better against Trump than Warren in 5/6 of those states. Though 538 ranks Warren's overall endorsement haul as holding higher value than Bernie's, he has undoubtedly received the most high-profile and coveted progressive endorsements with 3/4 of the squad in Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, and Rashida Tlaib. Warren secured Ayanna Pressley, the most moderate of the 4, with whom she shares her home state of Massachusetts. Warren easily beats Bernie with endorsements from Obama alumni, though, shockingly, the list of over 200 names that her campaign released includes Ed Buck, the megadonor currently on trial for allegedly sexually abusing, drugging, and killing multiple gay black men. Source, congress.gov/chart@Simon-Narode. These elected allies will surely be vital should either candidate manage to replace Trump and look to pass the agenda they're running on. Bernie and Warren's legislative records also hold some indication of how successful they might be as president. Bernie, who holds the record for most roll call amendments passed through Republican-controlled Congresses, has passed 220 pieces of legislation in his 28 years in office for an annual average of 8.14. Warren has passed 45 pieces of legislation in her 6 years, averaging 7.5 a year. The bolder and more inspiring these legislative plans and the leaders proposing them continue to be, the more of a mandate a people-powered progressive movement could deliver behind them, both at the ballot box and beyond. Choose wisely, and we may just get one in 2020. If you liked this article, you might also be interested in 10 reasons why Bernie Sanders is our best chance to beat Donald Trump, 125 plus reasons you should not vote for Joe Biden, and a guide to the 2020 Democratic candidates you should not vote for. Additional research provided by @philosopherob. 919. Politics. Bernie Sanders. Elizabeth Warren. Democrats. Election 2020. 919 claps. Written by Weston David Pagano. Following. Juventino, progressive, tall person. See responses, 10.
So, what'd you think of the article? And remember what it said right here?
Choose wisely, and we may just get one in 2020.
And I've already chosen Bernie Sanders. What surprises me there's some surprises in here. How do you say? Like this one. I mean, if I was a candidate, I would, with all the other candidates, I would do a non-aggression pact with all the other candidates. Well, Democratic candidates to be more precise. And if I won the general election, and if I won the primary, I'd try to do the same thing with my Republican opponent. Because a non-aggression agreement is a good idea. If you really think about it hard.
Early and often June 20th, 2019. Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren had a secret non-aggression agreement. Is it falling apart? By Gabriel de Benedetti. Frenemies? Photo. When Elizabeth Warren hosted Bernie Sanders at her place in Washington for a private meeting late on the second Wednesday of December, both senators finally came clean with what was, by that point, obvious but unspoken. They were almost certainly going to run for president. Neither tried dissuading the other. They'd long been allies on Capitol Hill, a political friendship more than a deep personal one, though little like the rivalry that many on the outside assumed. But they did make one agreement. Multiple senior Democrats briefed on the conversation confirmed to New York, Warren and Sanders would not go after each other directly on the campaign trail. That's not what they wanted 2020 to be about. Half a year of campaigning later, with the pair running second and third in the Democratic race to take on Donald Trump, that arrangement held. Then, on Wednesday, Politico shared a story on Wednesday by tweeting, "Centrists are coming around to Elizabeth Warren as an alternative to Bernie Sanders," and Sanders responded by retweeting it from his account, noting, "The cat is out of the bag. The corporate wing of the Democratic Party is publicly anybody but Bernie. They know our progressive agenda of Medicare for all, breaking up the big banks, taking on drug companies and raising wages is the real threat to the billionaire class." Political Twitter perked up. Here was a real shot in the war so many had so long expected, until Sanders went on CNN a few hours later to tell Chris Cuomo that tweet was not about Elizabeth Warren at all. But this was the second rapid escalation and cleanup of the month. On June 7, U.S. News & World Report published a story quoting an anonymous Sanders advisor hacking at Warren's prospects. Warren fundamentally fails a basic threshold question: can she beat Trump? Look at the general election polling. She does the worst of all candidates tested. That's the DNA test debacle. It just fundamentally killed her. People want somebody who can beat Trump. She loses that argument. After it appeared, Faiz Shakir texted Kristen Orthman, his former colleague in Harry Reid's office. "This doesn't reflect Bernie's thoughts, or mine, or the campaign's official position," Shakir, now Sanders' campaign manager, told Orthman, now Warren's communications director and one of her closest advisors. This was true. Sanders himself, true to form, only reads polls when his closest aides shove them in front of him, and he's far more preoccupied with his own campaign's social media metrics than the narrative that Warren is surging. But at least one of Sanders' advisors had, in fact, felt strongly enough about Warren's political threat to the Vermonter to make some noise. Others were starting to let their annoyance with the new Warren Rising commentary be known with not-so-veiled tweets about how to interpret the polling, and others still were questioning internally why Sanders was choosing to give his big speech about defining democratic socialism now, in mid-June, when it would obviously be read as an acknowledgement of his fellow progressives' new strength. Get unlimited access to Intelligencer and everything else New York. Learn more. ND. And, when the time came last week, it was, the Times quoted Barack Obama's former communications director calling the speech a pretty clear indication he is feeling the heat from Elizabeth Warren's recent momentum, Sanders's attempt to reclaim the anti-capitalist mantle he ran on in 2016, from her. The Washington Post's preview warned it could sharpen the contrast with Warren, who is increasingly battling Sanders for liberal voters. The Week suggested Bernie Sanders' socialism speech might have been more about Elizabeth Warren than Trump. Bernie 2020 is now 4 months old, and as the senator's team continues to wrestle with how, exactly, to shape the latest version of his appeal in a political landscape radically different from 2016's, the campaign's posture toward Warren, who Sanders used to call "my favorite senator," and whose own consideration of a campaign in 2016 nearly kept Sanders from running, out of deference remains one of its least settled matters. Figuring out that posture would appear, from the outside, to be one of its most urgent matters. For months, Sanders was widely thought to be the clear second-place contender in the Democratic race, trailing only Joe Biden as Warren reeled, unable to gain a foothold. But in recent weeks, a new Iowa poll showed Warren and Sanders effectively tied, as did another in California, yet another in Texas, and one nationally. Separate new surveys in South Carolina and Nevada showed Warren ahead of Sanders, as did one national poll. She overtook him in mentions on cable news. And, as might be expected, some on Team Sanders started pushing back. The U.S. News quote was the loudest articulation of an argument some Sanders allies have made behind the scenes: he's electable, is she? For weeks. The day after Warren hit the ground in Michigan for a campaign swing earlier this month, some Sanders aides started recirculating an internal Michigan and Midwestern polling memo showing his strength in the region, specifically pointing out how in a new poll Warren trailed Trump among independents. Often, when reporters note that Warren has invested in a huge Iowa organizing operation, Sanders' allies point out that he has over 25,000 volunteers on the ground there. And even if you accept that Warren's numbers are improving, they say, the pair is still essentially tied. She's not suddenly winning. They're fucking unnerved and grasping at straws. But frankly, if they're not nervous, they're out of touch. One former Sanders 2016 aide, who is unaligned with a candidate in 2020, said of Sanders' campaign, "I don't know how you can not be." Yet this is still not a consensus view in Sanders' orbit. Much of his team is far more hesitant to engage in any kind of fight with Warren, even implicitly. Many of them like Warren, and believe that the notion the candidates are on a collision course is a creation of the political media that misunderstands the candidates and their campaigns. This is the official line, and indeed many of his aides scoffed when the Times labeled a recent tweet from Sanders' research director about Warren's economic rhetoric an attack. Meanwhile, though it's true Warren has hired some ex-Sanders aides for her 2020 bid like Brendan Summers, Sanders' former caucus director, and Kuno Urayaha, a senior organizing official, and that much of their messaging overlaps, many on Team Sanders are convinced that her rising numbers coincide more with polling slides for Biden and other candidates. In other words, she is not directly picking up Sanders voters. "I think that there are a certain number of people who would like to see a woman elected, and I understand that," Sanders said on CNN when asked about Warren on Wednesday, before praising her. "There are people who would like to see somebody who was younger, and I understand that also. There are a lot of factors out there." On Monday, Sanders' campaign sent around a memo from Shakir about Sanders' polling strength. In two new national polls, Sanders is one of only two candidates ahead of Trump. A separate poll shows Sanders with the largest lead against Trump of any 2020 Democrat, it notes, without naming Warren, but later linking to a series of polls showing Sanders in second place, over her. At the same time, while other competitors have improved their position in the Democratic primary, Sanders has maintained his second-place position in every national poll, and many state polls. Last week, he took back second place in cable mentions from Warren. Sanders' big socialism speech, accordingly, was meant to do much more than just fight off Warren. The senator's team entered the race with their first order of business to ensure as many of Sanders' 2016 voters as possible were on his side again, and then to begin chipping into new blocks of voters, primarily older women and African Americans. This was how his top advisors framed the challenge of 2020 to him at his first political planning session in D.C. in January 2018. As Sanders formally launched his 2020 bid, delivering a big speech about his vision for democratic socialism was always on the to-do list for this spring or summer, according to operatives familiar with the plan. The idea was to expand his appeal, including with older voters wary of the socialism tag, by explaining that his ideology really just entailed a natural extension of Franklin D. Roosevelt's work, and demonstrating how Republicans have unsuccessfully attacked Democrats as socialists for decades. Speaking last week, he made this point by invoking Roosevelt, Truman, John F. Kennedy, Bill Clinton, and Obama, quoting Truman, "Socialism is their name for almost anything that helps all the people." And Trump, he said, previewing what could be part of a general election argument, is the beneficiary of what he called corporate socialism. But, running against 23 others, Sanders has had to spend more time than he expected on consolidating support among his 2016 voters, which has meant spending time drawing contrasts with his opponents, including Warren. None of this campaign is based in reaction to another candidate. It is all based out of telling voters that Bernie Sanders has a unique philosophy, vision, and theory of change, said Shakir. And he's gotta talk about that, and make it clear to voters. And hopefully they'll understand that, and we'll have to live with whatever the voters decide. But it wasn't Sanders' electability argument that generated the most response. The biggest applause of the afternoon, by far, came when Sanders unfurled a line designed to rile up those who were already inclined to support him, not the Sanders curious. Never before in all our history have these forces been so united against one candidate as they stand today, Sanders said, quoting Roosevelt, but acknowledging the parallels to today as the audience of supporters erupted in joy at the idea that Sanders stands alone. They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred. Sanders never talks explicitly about Warren, his closest ideological ally in the race, on the campaign trail. But he knows that any attempt to distance himself from the rest of the field comes with an implied shot at her, too, especially now. And now it's late enough in the game that he's okay with that. It's a circumstance of timing. If Buttigieg was rising, or if Beto was rising, we'd still be giving the same speech. Same message, said Shakir. Maybe the lens with which the media sees it would be different. Sign up for the Intelligencer newsletter. Daily news about the politics, business, and technology shaping our world. Terms and privacy notice. Tags. Vision 2020. Bernie Sanders. Elizabeth Warren. The Democrats. More. 15 comments.
Worth noting, right? Worth knowing, right? Me, I would have not made it private. I would have publicly announced it. Because I want elections to be clean races, not dirty wars. Who agrees with me on that? Leave it in the comments. Okay, hang on a minute, folks. I gotta do something real quick. Okay, folks, I'm back. Now there was another part. Let's see. That seems interesting. And worth noting. Let's take a read at this.
Home. Personal finance. America's 1% hasn't controlled this much wealth since before the Great Depression. Published, August 5, 2018, 10:03 a.m. Eastern Time. Facebook icon. Twitter icon. LinkedIn icon. Flipboard icon. Email icon. Comment icon. 128. Text resize. Print icon. The top 1% took home 22% of all income in 2015. Spencer Platt. In 2015, the top 1% of Americans made 26.3 times as much income as the bottom 99%. By Carrie Paul. The gap between the rich and the poor in America has ballooned over the last several decades. In 2015, the top 1% of Americans made 26.3 times as much income as the bottom 99%, an increase from 2013, when they earned 25.3 times as much, according to a recent study released by the Economic Policy Institute, a left-leaning Washington, D.C. think tank. A family needed an annual income of $421,926 to be part of the 1% nationally, the study said, but in some states the threshold was higher. The top 1% of Americans took home more than 22% of all income in 2015, the study found. That's the highest share since a peak of 23.9% just before the Great Depression in 1928. On Wednesday, Amazon AMZN, plus 1.42% founder Jeff Bezos became the richest person of the modern era as his wealth surpassed $150 billion. The fortunes of people like Bezos and those made on Wall Street, in Hollywood, and Silicon Valley fuel much of wealth inequality in the U.S., but the issue affects most of the country, the report showed. The incomes of the top 1% grew faster than the bottom 99% in 43 states between 2009 and 2015. In 9 states in the U.S., the top 1% represents more than half of all income growth.
Say you want to know the 4 things rich people do with their money? Well, whatever your answer is, here it is.
Two years ago, I was in a smoke explosion. It keeps you alive. My gear will allow me to make it out. I want to make sure that everybody goes home to their families.
Like it or not, wealthy Americans spend, save, and invest differently from the average person. You might think that you'll never be like the ones that financial advisors call very rich, those who have investable assets of at least $3 million. But you could still learn from them. Here are 4 things that most rich people do with their money that you should consider doing too. First, they delay gratification. More than 80% of wealthy investors say their long-term goals are more important than their instant gratification. If you put $100 towards your retirement every month, you'd have roughly $40,000 after 20 years, assuming it grows around 5% a year. If you had spent that money instead of investing it, you'd miss out on an extra $15,000. 2, they use debt to their advantage. 2/3 of high net worth investors say it's a good approach to use credit strategically to build wealth. For instance, if you have a loan, like a mortgage or a student loan, that's a low-rate fixed loan, you could pay it down on schedule instead of racing to pay it off. Then you will have a little more money each month to boost your retirement fund. Of course, using credit has risks, but if you pay off your credit card balance in full every month, you could also consider using a rewards card or a cashback card. 3, they buy and hold. When you buy an investment like a stock or a bond, plan to hold onto it for years and years to come. This is called the buy and hold strategy. It's tried and true advice Warren Buffett himself touts. Buffett says money made in investing is made by owning good companies for long periods of time. 4, they have tangible assets. Remember, there's more to investing than just stocks and bonds. Invest in something tangible, like real estate or farmland, something that can grow over time. Nearly half of high net worth investors have some kind of physical assets that produce income or increase in value over time. You might be noticing a trend with these tips. They all focus on long-term growth. If you want to treat your money like high earners do, don't try to get rich quick. Instead, focus on assets that can grow into the future.
Two years ago, I was in a smoke explosion. Your gear is what...
Interesting, right? Now that you know, let's continue.
What are capital gains, and how do they impact investments and tax? The gap between the rich and the poor. Meanwhile, the median net worth of Americans currently hovers at $68,828 per household. 1 in 5 Americans say they have more credit card debt than they do in emergency savings, and less than 40% of Americans say they have enough savings to cover a $1,000 emergency room visit or car repair. Also see how wealthy and middle-class families are sliding inexorably into the red. Rising inequality affects virtually every part of the country, not just large urban areas or financial centers, said Estelle Saumiller, a socio-economist at the Institute for Research in Economic and Social Sciences in France and author on the study. It's a persistent problem throughout the country, in big cities and small towns, in all 50 states. While the economy continues to recover, policymakers should make it a top priority to grow the incomes of working people while reining in corporate profits. The AP, a liberal nonprofit associated with the labor movement, recommends returning bargaining power to U.S. workers, increasing political participation by all citizens, and boosting public investments in child care, education, housing, and health care. Such policies will help prevent the wealthiest few from appropriating more than their fair share of the nation's expanding economic pie, Saumiller said. Such ideas have gained popularity as the 2018 midterm elections approach, with New York's Alexa Ocasio-Cortez winning an upset victory in June's Democratic primary in New York's 14th congressional district, running on a platform of Medicare for all and reigning in Wall Street. She also supports the idea of a government program guaranteeing paid jobs for anybody who wants one. Critics say such policies are ill-conceived and will bury us in debt. Another theory on the cause of the rising inequality: the decline of unions, according to a study released by the AP in August 2017. Today, only 11% of American workers are covered by unions, which is a sharp contrast from the 1950s, when a third of the U.S. workforce was unionized or in a job represented by a union. Union workers these days earn on average 13.2% more than non-unionized workers with similar education and experience in the same sector. We want to hear from you. Join the conversation. Comment. Quote references. AMZN. Plus 29.05 plus 1.42%.
Okay, Allison. I only have 42 minutes, so I got plenty more time. So let's continue. Okay, here's something to me.
Business. Economics. Sustainable business. Diversity and equality in business. Small business. Economics blog. U.S. economic growth and recession. U.S. wealth inequality, top 0.1% worth as much as the bottom 90%. Not since the Great Depression has wealth inequality in the U.S. been so acute, new in-depth study finds. Angela Monahan. Thursday, November 13, 2014, 07.00 EST. 6314. 564. Unemployed men queue for coffee and bread at a soup kitchen in New York, during the Great Depression. Photograph, FPG/Getty Images. Wealth inequality in the U.S. is at near record levels, according to a new study by academics. Over the past 3 decades, the share of household wealth owned by the top 0.1% has increased from 7% to 22%. For the bottom 90% of families, a combination of rising debt, the collapse of the value of their assets during the financial crisis, and stagnant real wages have led to the erosion of wealth. The share of wealth owned by the top 0.1% is almost the same as the bottom 90%. The share of wealth owned by the top 0.1% is almost the same as the share owned by the bottom 90%. The research by Emmanuel Sayes and Gabriel Zuckman PDF illustrates the evolution of wealth inequality over the last century. The chart shows how the top 0.1% of families now own roughly the same share of wealth as the bottom 90%. The picture actually improved in the aftermath of the 1930s Great Depression, with wealth inequality falling through to the late 1970s. It then started to rise again, with the share of total household wealth owned by the top 0.1% rising to 22% in 2012 from 7% in the late 1970s. The top 0.1% includes 160,000 families with total net assets of more than $20 million, £13 million, in 2012. In contrast, the share of total U.S. wealth owned by the bottom 90% of families fell from a peak of 36% in the mid-1980s, to 23% in 2012, just 1 percentage point above the top 0.1%. There is a new wealth divide in the U.S. Average wealth of families in the bottom 90% and the top 1% of the wealth distribution, in constant 2010 U.S. dollars, 1946 to 2012 photograph, Emmanuel Sayes and Gabriel Zuckman. Advertisement. The growing indebtedness of most Americans is the main reason behind the erosion of the wealth share of the bottom 90%, according to the report's authors. Many middle-class families own their homes and have pensions, but too many have higher mortgage repayments, higher credit card bills, and higher student loans to service. The average wealth of bottom 90% jumped during the stock market boom of the late 1990s and the housing bubble of the early 2000s. But it then collapsed during and after the most recent financial crisis. Since then, there has been no recovery in the wealth of the middle class and the poor, the authors say. The average wealth of the bottom 90% of families is equal to $80,000 in 2012, the same level as in 1986. In contrast, the average wealth for the top 1% more than tripled between 1980 and 2012. Income inequality across the G20 is worrying, Oxfam warns. Income inequality in the G20 photograph, Oxfam. Among the 9 G20 countries with sufficient data, featured in the graph above, the richest 1% of people, by income, have increased their income share significantly since 1980, according to Oxfam. In Australia, for example, the top 1% earned 4.8% of the country's income in 1980. That had risen to more than 9% by 2010. Oxfam says that in the time that Australia has held the G20 presidency, between 2013 and 2014, the total wealth in the G20 increased by $17 TN, but the richest 1% of people in the G20 captured $6.2 TN of this wealth, 36% of the total increase. America faces an epic choice in the coming year, and the results will define the country for a generation. These are perilous times. Over the last 3 years, much of what The Guardian holds dear has been threatened: democracy, civility, truth. This U.S. administration is establishing new norms of behavior. Anger and cruelty disfigure public discourse, and lying is commonplace. Truth is being chased away. But with your help we can continue to put it center stage. Rampant disinformation, partisan news sources, and social media's tsunami of fake news is no basis on which to inform the American public in 2020. The need for a robust, independent press has never been greater, and with your support we can continue to provide fact-based reporting that offers public scrutiny and oversight. You've read more than 24 articles in the last 4 months. Our journalism is free and open for all, but it's made possible thanks to the support we receive from readers like you across America in all 50 states. America is at a tipping point, finely balanced between truth and lies, hope and hate, civility and nastiness. Many vital aspects of American public life are in play: the Supreme Court, abortion rights, climate policy, wealth inequality, big tech, and much more. The stakes could hardly be higher. As that choice nears, The Guardian, as it has done for 200 years, and with your continued support, will continue to argue for the values we hold dear: facts, science, diversity, equality, and fairness. U.S. Editor, John Mulholland. On the occasion of its 100th birthday in 1921, the editor of The Guardian said, "Perhaps the chief virtue of a newspaper is its independence. It should have a soul of its own. That is more true than ever. Freed from the influence of an owner or shareholders, The Guardian's editorial independence is our unique driving force and guiding principle." We also want to say a huge thank you to everyone who generously supports The Guardian. You provide us with the motivation and financial support to keep doing what we do. Every reader contribution, big or small, is so valuable. Support The Guardian from as little as $1, it only takes a minute. Thank you. Support The Guardian. Topics: U.S. economic growth and recession. Economics blog. U.S. economy. Economics. Global economy. Analysis. Reuse this content. Advert.
Okay, that seemed interesting. You know, I wonder if this would be better. I wonder if this would sound better if it, if it had little music in the background. What do you think? You think I should have put music? Let's see. Let me go to foreign policy. I have 32 minutes, so let's see. Let's see this one.
Ideas. It's foreign policy that distinguishes Bernie this time. He's challenging American exceptionalism in a far more radical way than his 2020 competitors are. February 21, 2019. Peter Bionard, professor of journalism at the City University of New York. Enjoy unlimited access to The Atlantic for less than $1 per week. Sign in. Subscribe now. Eric Thayer/Reuters. Link copied. The conventional wisdom is that Bernie Sanders is a victim of his own success. His populist agenda has helped push the party to the left, declared the New York Times in its story about his presidential announcement. But in 2020, he may lose ground to newer faces who have adopted many of his ideas. There's an obvious truth here, from a $15 national minimum wage to Medicare for all to free college tuition. Sanders' opponents have embraced policies that were considered radical when he first proposed them during the 2016 campaign. But what the Times misses is that there's another policy realm where Sanders may find it easier to carve out a distinctly lefty niche: America's relationship to the rest of the world. Play the Atlantic crossword. In 2016, foreign policy was the area where Sanders distinguished himself least. For the first 5 months of his candidacy, his campaign website didn't even include a foreign policy section. At a debate on November 14, 2015, when the moderator, John Dickerson, asked Sanders about the ISIS attacks that had killed more than 100 people in France the previous day, the Vermont senator dispatched the subject in a mere 2 sentences and then pivoted to domestic affairs. This time, by contrast, Sanders arguably talks about foreign policy more than any other declared candidate does. Of the 4 senators who launched their candidacies via video, Elizabeth Warren, Cory Booker, Kamala Harris, and Sanders only has mentioned foreign policy. Over the past 2 years, Sanders has given 2 speeches outlining a broad foreign policy vision. Warren has delivered one, last November at American University, which she paired with an essay in foreign affairs. Booker, Harris, Amy Klobuchar, and Kirsten Gillibrand haven't given any. and of the senators running for president, Sanders owns the biggest foreign policy victory of the last Congress, the vote to end U.S. funding for the Saudi war in Yemen. More by Peter Bernard. Impeachment. The conventional wisdom is that Bernie Sanders is a victim of his own success.
Oh, that's not right.
But Sanders doesn't just talk about foreign policy more. He talks about it in a more radical way. None of the senators running for president are hawks. Last January, Booker co-wrote an op-ed arguing that absent new congressional authorization it would be illegal to keep American troops in Syria once the fight against ISIS was over. In her foreign affairs essay, Warren called for ending the endless war that has sapped America's strength, and for rethinking the singular focus on counterterrorism that has dangerously distorted U.S. policies. Warren and Gillibrand also led the fight to keep the Trump administration from pulling out of the Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty with Russia. What distinguishes Sanders is the same quality that distinguished him on domestic policy in 2016, his willingness to cross red lines that have long defined the boundaries of acceptable opinion. One clear example is Israel. Most of the Senate Democrats running for president have shifted left on the subject. Booker, after initially supporting legislation to criminalize boycotts of the Jewish state, voted against a similar bill last month. Warren, after defending Israeli military actions in the Gaza Strip earlier in her career, last year criticized Israel's response to protests there. But Sanders has gone much further. He's produced videos that call Gaza an open-air prison. He's depicted Benjamin Netanyahu as part of the growing worldwide movement toward authoritarianism, and, most controversially of all, he's suggested cutting U.S. military aid to Israel. But Israel is only the beginning of Sanders's sacrilege. He's the only presidential candidate in recent memory who regularly describes the Cold War not as a heroic American victory, but as a cautionary tale.
I agree with that.
Sanders doesn't just warn against U.S. military intervention in Venezuela, as Warren and Gillibrand have. He warns against it while invoking the United States' long history of inappropriately intervening in Latin American countries. In his speech at Westminster College in 2017, he spent paragraph after paragraph detailing America's disastrous 20th-century interventions: Iran, Chile, El Salvador, Guatemala, Vietnam, a litany that resembled a Noam Chomsky lecture more than a typical presidential candidate's foreign policy speech. Peter Bernard, America needs an entirely new foreign policy for. Sanders's darker view of Cold War foreign policy isn't mere historical revisionism. It's linked to his critique of American foreign policy today. Now, as then, he wants America to shun the quest for global supremacy that leads it to overthrow regimes it can't control and to instead pursue a foreign policy based on partnership, rather than dominance. That's why, in his Westminster speech, Sanders did something Democrats have rarely done in recent decades. He called for putting the United Nations, which he called one of the most important organizations for promoting a vision of a different world, near the heart of American foreign policy. What all this represents is a second phase of the assault on American exceptionalism that Sanders launched in 2016. Back then, Sanders challenged the domestic side of the exceptionalist creed, the belief that American capitalism buttressed by modest regulations and welfare provisions provides upward mobility. Now Sanders is poised to challenge exceptionalism in foreign policy, the belief that America, as a uniquely virtuous nation, can substitute its own self-interest and moral intuition for international institutions and international law. Once again, Sanders's heresies mirror the anti-exceptionalist turn among America's young. A 2017 Pew Research poll found that Americans over the age of 30 were far more likely to say that the U.S. stands above all other countries in the world, than to say, there are other countries that are better than the U.S. But among adults under 30, the latter view predominated by a margin of more than 2 to 1. Sanders's foreign policy radicalism may not reshape the Democratic Party as dramatically in 2020 as his domestic policy radicalism did in 2016, because foreign policy simply doesn't matter as much in contemporary politics as does domestic policy. But it may offer Sanders a way to distinguish himself among a field that, on domestic policy, is ideologically bunched together. For a presidential candidate, challenging American exceptionalism would, until recently, have seemed like a sure path to political oblivion. In a general election, it still might be. Sanders's critique of America's past sins could leave him vulnerable to Republicans who accuse him of blaming America first. And his emphasis on international cooperation and international institutions may seem naive when applied to zero-sum great power conflicts in places such as the South China Sea. Still, Sanders is poised to once again widen the parameters of acceptable debate. In 2016, he found a surprising appetite for his anti-capitalist heresies among the progressive young. In 2020, Americans will learn whether there's a market for his anti-imperial heresies too. We want to hear what you think about this article. Submit a letter to the editor or write to letters@theatlantic.com. Peter Bionart is a contributing writer at The Atlantic and a professor of journalism and political science at the City University of New York. Connect Twitter. Most popular. Won the $1 billion disinformation.
That's his account right there. Just a minute, folks. Let me see if I can put in a little gentle music or something.
change with his signature Shapiro intellect.
So let's say, for the sake of argument, that all of the water levels around the world rise by let's say 5 feet over the next 100 years, say 10 feet by the next 100 years, and it puts all the low-lying areas on the coast underwater, right? Which, let's say all of that happens. You think that people aren't going to just sell their homes and move?
Just one small problem. Sell their houses to who, Ben? Fucking Aquaman!
Here he is, dipping his webbed flipper.
That's kind of funny when you think about it.
A wide-ranging pattern of dishonesty and contempt for indigenous communities that disqualifies her candidacy for the 2020 Democratic presidential nomination. Twyla Barnes and Cole DeLon. If you're confused by the controversy over Elizabeth Warren's lack of documented indigenous ancestry, it's easy to understand why. The saga of Senator Warren's long history of self-identification as a Native American has percolated in political media outlets for almost 7 years, splashing into the news cycle at once sporadically and persistently in an awkward, jerky tempo that has yielded an abundance of misinformation and optical dissonance surrounding both the senator herself and her record of conduct toward tribal peoples. The serialized manner in which the most disturbing details about Warren have leaked into salient press coverage, coupled with conscious efforts by the senator to alternately dodge the flap and leverage it to her advantage, have obscured a wide-ranging pattern of dishonesty and contempt for indigenous communities that disqualifies her candidacy for the 2020 Democratic presidential nomination. Let's start with some clarification both phenotypically and culturally. There is absolutely no genealogical evidence that she has ancestors from North American Indian nations. Although Christopher Child of the New England Historic and Genealogical Society touted the discovery of a marriage certificate in May 2012 that bolstered Warren's claims, his find was quickly debunked. The document in question, it turned out, doesn't exist, and the society made clear that it has not expressed a position on whether Mrs. Warren has Native American ancestry, nor do we possess any primary sources to prove that she is. 2. The results of the genetic testing she infamously released last October relied on comparisons to markers derived from native populations in Latin America rather than the continental United States. 3. And such testing remains a dubious enterprise at best. Just several months before Warren, a dog in Canada tested positive for indigenous DNA. 4-5. Warren did not just innocently share family lore. As the Boston Globe first reported, the senator identified herself as Native American in FedEx. Warren did not just innocently share Warren did not just innocently share family lore. As the Boston Globe first reported, the senator identified herself as Native American in federally mandated diversity statistics for at least 6 years while a professor at Harvard Law School, despite lacking the tribal affiliation outlined in those documents. 6. Contemporaneously, Harvard repeatedly touted Warren as an example of ethnic diversity among law school faculty to academic press outlets, championing her as the institution's only tenured minority woman and first woman of color. The University of Pennsylvania, at which Warren taught prior to Harvard, likewise cited her in a minority equity report. 7. And Warren admitted that she had listed herself for a full decade as a minority in Association of American Law School directories from 1986 until 1995, the year she secured tenure at Harvard. 8. Warren never engaged with indigenous cohorts on the campuses in question. Although the implicit purpose of diversity initiatives is to ensure representation of perspectives informed by a variety of cultures, the executive director of Harvard's Native American program, could not recall Warren ever participating in any of its undertakings. 9-10. Warren can't keep her prevarications straight about how and why she identified as Native American. In the primary days of her 2012 Senate campaign, she professed to be wholly unaware that Harvard had been promoting her as a minority. I think I read it on the front page of the Herald. 11 Then, she insisted that she had never formally declared herself a minority. There is no reporting for this. It came up in lunch conversations once with faculty, after the fact. 12. She maintained that she had never claimed distinction as a minority to any employers until after she was hired. Those Association of American Law School directories, frequently used by law schools during the 1980s for recruiting, apparently notwithstanding. Now, after the emergence last week of a 1986 application to the Texas State Bar on which she described her race as American Indian, Warren offers a starkly different characterization than she did 7 years ago of just how pervasively she identified herself as an indigenous woman. All I know is, during this time period this is consistent with what I did. 13. Warren has trucked in reductive stereotypes about physical features to justify her ethnic posturing. When indigenous lineage and tribal links are out of the picture, high cheekbones are all you've got. 14. Surreally, neither the extensive scope of Warren's deceit nor her blithe ignorance about the heritage in which she continues to costume herself is even the most disquieting reflections of her clear disdain for indigenous America. For those, one may refer to Warren's years-long evasion of and attacks against Native voices who have expressed concerns about her background and behavior. During the summer of 2012, in the company of fellow Cherokee women united by a desire to educate and invest tribal perspectives into the contemporary discourse, I traveled to Massachusetts to seek an audience with Warren's team. The campaign agreed to the meeting via the Boston press only to renege upon our arrival and falsely malign us as the pawns of right-wing extremists. It stonewalled Indian Country Today, the largest indigenous news platform in the country. 15. It ignored Cherokee protesters at the state nominating event. 16. It rebuffed overtures from indigenous delegates at the Democratic National Convention. 17. In summary, when confronted with indigenous perspectives that posed an obstacle to her personal advancement, Warren's carefully calculated response was to pretend that we didn't exist. It was a strategy that would define the majority of Warren's freshman term in Congress. With a comfortable electoral victory in her rear view, she shrugged off her ethnic pride as readily as she self-segregated from the tribe with which she claimed kinship on the stump. 18. She remained largely quiet on the cares and galvanizing causes of Native peoples. She even called for the arrest of Greg Gray Cloud, a Crow Creek Sioux activist protesting the Keystone XL pipeline, from the Senate gallery. 19. Eventually, of course, the DNA debacle of her own making forced Warren to deliver a qualified mea culpa. But she has never acknowledged, much less apologized for, her active hostility toward the indigenous critics who first tried to reach out to her and then strived to hold her to account. She has unequivocally failed in the most foundational moral duties of her position: to listen, to engage, and to represent. For almost 6 years, she intentionally did what colonialism has always done to people of indigenous origin: she has erased us from our own story. And the fallout is real and concrete. Right now, left-leaning media reeks with the condescension of nominal white progressives, numerous prominent pundits and reporters among them, all too willing to dismiss and demean the insights of their indigenous counterparts. Because of their Twitter commentary on the subject, Ryan Grimm, D.C. bureau chief of The Intercept, accused Cherokees of doing Trump's work and enabling his abject racism. 20. Reporter Thor Benson of the Rolling Stone and the Daily Beast sneered at the virtue signaling of critiques about Warren by a in Hanktown, Dakota author. 21. In an article denounced by the Native American Journalists Association. 22. The Huffington Post's Jennifer Bendery minimized the chorus of Native qualms on the matter, even from the Cherokee Nation Secretary of State, as crickets. 23. Bill Maher lectured his television viewers, "If you think this stupid, blown out of proportion Indian controversy makes her inauthentic, you're the phony." 24. What a perfect illustration of the evolution of white supremacy: first, Euro entitlement to native territories, then, white entitlement to native identity sans the cultural contexts that confer meaning on said identity, and, now, inevitability, the ascendancy of white presumption to literally dictate how natives should think and feel. This is the malignant legacy of Elizabeth Warren, bringing out the chauvinistic worst in the ostensible best and normalizing scorn for perspectives of color. Of course, the senator has predicated her career on a second false identity, that of a warrior for the disenfranchised. Her animosity toward one of the most systematically oppressed demographics in the nation's history emphatically underscores that she is not only an ethnic imposter but an ideological fraud as well. Black and Latinx voters in pivotal primary states should ask themselves how they can trust a politician who spent years determinately avoiding the minority community to which she contends she belongs. And her competitors for the Democratic nod must roundly denounce the insidious racism of her actions and her cavalier marginalization of indigenous points of view that challenge her pursuit of power. "This is the fight of our lives," Warren declared earlier this month at the launch of her 2020 run. Inconveniently for her, Indigenous Americans have been fighting for their lives for generations. "We've survived invasions and epidemics. We've endured occupations. We've outlasted efforts to annihilate and acculturate us out of existence. We're still here. And we're not going to be silent." Twyla Barnes, Cherokee, is a genealogist with over 10 years' experience and is registered with the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma. She is also a writer, most widely known for her Cherokee history and genealogy site, Polly's Granddaughter. Follow her on Twitter as @PolleGdaughter. Cole DeLon, Kiowa, is a freelance writer, editor, and author. He is a member of the Kiowa tribe of Oklahoma. Support Indian country today by becoming a member. Click here. 1 http://www.paulusgranddaughter.com/p/elizabeth-warren-information.html?m=1 2 https://www.theatlantic.com/politics/archive/2012/05/is-elizabeth-warren-what/2574415 3 https://www.washingtonexaminer.com/news/white-house/elizabeth-warrens--DNA-match-is-to-Latin-Americans 4 https://www.cbc.ca/news/canada/edmonton/dna-testing-indigenous-ancestry-1.470597 5 https://motherboard.vice.com/n_us/article/435pnp/a-sketchy-dna-testing-service-said-dogs-head-viagard 6 https://www.bostonglobe.com/metro/2012/05/2040-native-american/osdicf-hj-x5cch3es0srem/story.html 7 https://www.bostonglobe.com/metro/2012/05/10-hyphen-more-light-elizabeth-warren-minority-status/ee5/6vld-lvrpna-nq-nq-vgm/story.html 8 https://www.bostonglobe.com/metro/2012/04/2/9/elizabeth-was-listed-minority-person-was-listed-withdrawers-list-hyphen-ybztd-rh3qt8xru6kzklds/story.html 9 https://www.bostonglobe.com/metro/2012/05/3/elizabeth-warren-highfen-native-american-status/e7rnu-dg6-cac-vjzq-nr8wjl/story.html 10 https://www.bostonglobe.com/metro/2012/05/indicate-harvard-repeatedly-reported-elizabeth-warren-native-american/osdicf-hj-x5cch3es0srem/story.html 11 https://www.bostonherald.com/2019/02/01//02/017-hyphen-warrens-a-few-bucks-short 12 https://www.bostonGlobe.com/metro/2012/05/30/elizabeth-harvard-penn-native-e7/rnu-dg6-cac-vjzj-qnr8wjl/story.html 13 https://www.washingtonpost.com/politics/ after new document is revealed Warren struggles with questions of identity/2019/02/06/bf380530D9011D85006444DC98_dc_story.html
know,
no direct equals on end UTM_term equals.fef
just please bear with us.
484b1f70
Me.
14 https://www.washingtonpost.com/blogs/thefix/post/Elizabeth Warren struggles with response to Native American questions again/2012/05/03/GIQAZ8PLZT_blog.html UTM_term equals 0.5 EBA79C701F8 15 https://newsemaven.io/Indian Country Today/archive/Cherokee-women-with-Elizabeth-Warren-Hyphen-to-Elizabeth-Warren-Hyphen-campaign-Them-4ADMHZB3IEIA8UFX92KQ 16 https://www.bostonherald.com/2012/06/18/Cherokee-Warren-Showdown 17 https://newsemaven.io/Indian Country Today/archive/Elizabeth-Warren-Facing-Criticism-at-Democratic-National-Convention-4_Virevz-EXYK-UNPWDAQDL7Q 18 https://www.usatoday.com/story/onpolitics/2013/01/08/ Elizabeth Warren Native American Senate Directory/1818059/ 19 https://newsemaven.io/Indian Country Today/archive/Greg-G-the-Hyphen-G-Cloud-the-Hyphen-the-Hyphen-Saying-and-Hyphen-Honor-Song-Hyphen-for-the-Hyphen-the-Hyphen https://mobile.twitter.com/RyanGrim/status/1094446376962928641 21 https://mobile.twitter.com/Thor_Benson/status/109444621390337 22 https://www.msn.com/and-ca/entertainment/tv/news/native-american-journalists-association-demands-over-irresponsible-elizabeth-warren-story/ar-bbs6zjz 23 https://www.huffingtonpost.co.uk/entry/elizabeth-warren-dna-test-native-american_us_5C1955050504B04325554C512BB 24 https://www.foxnews.com/entertainment/bill-mar-defense-elizabeth-warren-other-200-purity-tests 3 25 Comments 25
And that's it. And that's it for this video because I ran out of time. So if you want to see, any of these, you just have to look online. Now moving on to the next video. I'll be moving on to the next video after I show you these. All right, thanks for watching this live stream. Now don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and leave a comment down below. And if you can, help my channel grow by subscribing to as many, by subscribing and helping this channel grow, by subscribing and helping my channel grow with as many, by subscribing to my channel and sharing it with as many people as you can. And I know I probably didn't reach the maximum number of viewers I wanted during this live stream. So help this video reach 100 plus views if you can. All right. But I should have known this would happen. But until then, Jerry Bartel, signing off.